Poehemian Poetry Podcast presents American author Pietros Maneos. Thank you for being here today. It's a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to speak with you.
I'm excited as well. Can you start off by telling me a few things about yourself?
I attended the Haverford School in Pennsylvania and Northfield Mount Hermon in Massachusetts, and then I went to the University of Miami for college, and I majored in English literature and classical antiquity. My first publication was in Rome, Italy, in 2001, The Soul of a Young Man, and then most recently I published a novella, The Italian Pleasures of Gabriele, Paterkallos, with SD Press.
Excellent. And I know that you are Greco-Italian, so how does your Greek and Italian background factor into your writing?
It factors in immensely. Much of my reading, which is a primary influence on my writing, is from the one could say Roman world or Greco-Italian world. I read a lot of ancient writers, philosophers, which influences my own work. So definitely that my ethnicity plays a primary role in my own work.
Also, as you already mentioned, The Italian Pleasures of Gabriele Paterkallos has been published by SD Press. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I am very glad I purchased a copy for myself. It was a very aesthetically pleasing read, to say the least. I also noticed that the words are exquisitely poetic, with plenty of vivid images of Italy infused throughout the entire piece. It was honestly difficult for me to pick out a favorite letter out of all of them, but here are a few lines that stood out to me the most. Do you not find beauty to be utterly overwhelming, the providence of so much pain, yet so much pleasure? And the moderns have told us that God is dead. Beauty is dead, art is dead. But the only thing dead, Odysseus, is the souls of the men who penned such things. Just to name a few.
The first line that you mentioned there was which again? The provenance of so much pain and so much pleasure. Yeah, I mean, the idea I was expressing in that was Gabriele is sort of a romantic archetype, and he's a man that stands apart from his times and against his times. Against much of this sort of orthodox cynicism that one finds with modern intellectuals. But it does not mean he's sort of this fool with rose-tinted glasses, and that he does not suffer. He suffers, but his suffering is derived from his sensitivity to beauty, if you will, not an overwhelming sense of despair, the ugliness of the world, but almost verging on despair from the sheer amount of beauty in the world, and the realization that someday can quite possibly cease to exist for him. And just from his experience, the ancient Greeks had the word pathos, which means passion and suffering. They didn't have two distinct words. So to have a passion for something was to suffer for something. So he's definitely of that ilk. And then the second line that you mentioned was, again, is just consonant with his stance apart from his age, his defiance of the culture at large, and, his innate romanticism, if you will, which is something that is sort of mocked in modernity.
Yes, I noticed that he is both a lover of beauty and love, which makes me appreciate this character even further.
Yeah, he's a man who really suffers and starves for beauty and passion and emotion in his own existence and in the world in general. And so the frustration, his despair sometimes is not finding that, is not the world that doesn't really conform to his ideal sometimes. And a lot of it sort of philippic against modernity, and I wanted to make sure it wasn't just descending into a rant. But there's times when he's just sort of pontificating, against other writers, against other philosophers, painters, cultural critics, and whatnot. But I wanted to balance that sort of broody, ranting aspect of his persona with his celebration of beauty, and it was somewhat difficult to find just that right balance between the two.
I feel like that balance is very good throughout. He's also a very relatable character that way. There's occasional ranting, but I also feel like there's a depth to him that we all maybe strive for or have. And I'd like to give some background information. Gabriele Paterkallos, a young American poet of Greco-Italian descent, is visiting Rome to have his first poetry collection published, as well as to travel throughout Italy. During his Italian sojourn, he exchanges a series of letters with a self-exiled American novelist residing in Paris, Odysseus Payne, a few years his senior and a bit more established within literary circles. The letters, Gabriele's private musings upon life, literature, and beauty, are highly personal, yet still retain a unique universality about them. Indeed, many letters read as passionate paean to Italy's timeless beauty redolent of a 19th century nobleman, detailing the sights of his Italian grand tour. Gabriele is an arch-romantic to the core, positioning himself against the prevailing mores of the modern world. One seems to vacillate between intense feelings of revulsion, attraction, and even pity for Gabriele, not knowing whether to renounce him entirely or to fall deeply in love with him. And even those who have come to despise him find his broody, mysterious persona quite irresistible. So what inspired you to write The Telling Pleasures of Gabriele Paterkallos?
It started from a series of letters exchanged with Roman Payne. Obviously, that's the model for Odysseus Payne. Roman Payne is an American novelist residing in Paris. He's published 4 novels to date, and he is finishing his most recent one, The Wanderess, now, which should be released by Mode Room, which is a press in Paris. And so Roman and I exchanged a series of letters. He's in a way a kindred spirit, a long-lost brother, if you will, of mine, and he feels in a similar way with regard to aesthetics, with regard to literature, and many other things. And so he and I exchanged a series of letters, and he admired my poetry, especially my poetry set in antiquity. In one of the letters he said, "Are you working on a novel?" Which really wasn't a question as much as it was a polite way of saying, you should be working on a novel. I thought, what could I do that would interest me? And so I wanted to bring the romantic archetype modeled on such persons as Byron's Childe Harold, Lermontov's Petchorin, Goethe's Werther, and bring, or if one has a more modern sensibility and is not familiar with those characters, than perhaps Mark Halperin's Alessandro Giuliani, or Michael Ondaatje's The English Patient, which is a popular film, Count Almashi, to sort of bring that romantic figure into the 21st century. So, and I've always loved the epistolary format, which is letter format. And so I just began, and obviously Odysseus Payne is model on Roman, and so it just expanded from there. And I sent the letters, at the turn of the century in 2001, when I happened to be in Rome, Italy. I was there for an extended summer. It just developed. I didn't want it to be a lengthy piece. It's about 41,000 words, and 40,000 was sort of where I wanted to place it in its length, which I think it's about 160 pages in its format. So and that's basically how it developed through the interaction with Roman.
And I'd like to mention that I also enjoyed the setup of everything, how it's in letter format, and the language is so alliterative. And I would like to ask you how the process was of publishing this and whatnot.
It's one of those things where once Esthete consented to publish the work, I didn't really look elsewhere. I didn't want to play the literary game of the query letter and dealing with agents and publicists or publishers saying, well, if you remove this part, it'll be more appealing to this particular demographic. They gave me full artistic control. One of my literary heroes is the Greek poet Constantine Cavafy, and he actually never published in his lifetime. And one of the things I admire besides his work is his approach to literature. And he didn't look outside for verification, lionization of his work, and he just basically continued writing, and he would print his work and send it to his friends. And he never published in his lifetime. Never made one penny from his literary pursuits. And I've always admired Cavafy for that. And so with this, yeah, I just didn't want to play the game of sending to someone in New York and having them destroy my work, basically, or suggest, well, this is too self-consciously literary, or this is, you need to, this is going to offend a segment of the population, so we're cutting this. And yeah, I just, once SD, which the literary press models again on Mode Room, the Romans publisher in Paris, once they gave the go-ahead, I was content with that. And surprisingly, it sold well, thus far. I didn't anticipate it to have much of a commercial appeal. I thought it would maybe resonate with other writers and artists and the like. But yeah, it sold well, and SD is happy with it.
That truly is wonderful. And also, I know we've talked about the main character, Gabriele, but I would like to discuss him a little bit more because he's so intriguing. I feel like his charm and wit illuminates in all of the pages. Is there anything more you can tell me about the character himself?
He's loosely modeled on myself in a way, but again, very loosely. And it's a composite portrait, not a singular portrait. So meaning, as I mentioned earlier, his predecessors are, these sort of romantic figures like a Don Quixote or a Pechorin or a Childe Harold or Werther. If I had to really condense 41,000 words into a few sentences trying to explain Gabriele, he's a sentio ergo sum man. And what that means in Latin is I feel, therefore I am, which is a repost to the famous cogito ergo sum. Much of 20th century thought in literature is cogito ergo sum. Men of the intellect instead of men of the soul. And Gabriele is definitely a man of sensations, of pleasure, of feeling, than of thought. It doesn't mean that he's thoughtless, but yes, sentio ergo sum. I feel, therefore I am. And the other thing about him is that I'm sure you noticed throughout, he constantly repeats the term, oh, the pleasure, the pleasure.
Yes.
Sometimes he'll say, oh, the beauty as well. And that is actually derived from Joseph Conrad's The Horror, the Horror. And in a way, to position him against 20th century literature, which is really proselytizing the horror of Conrad, right? It's even Eliot wanted to open his seminal Wasteland with that quotation. I believe it was Pound who convinced him to use the one of the Cumean Sibyl where it ends with I want to die. So Gabriele is not a man who expresses the horror. He's not a man who, as the Cumean Sibyl, I want to die. He's a man who wants more life, more experience, more sensation. Again, that romantic sensibility. So that's the reason that the well-informed reader, when he repeats the pleasure, should immediately think of Joseph Conrad, the horror.
Yes,
and it's a definitive and explicit break from much of 20th century, and one can even extend that to 21st century literature, where sort of pessimism is inflated with wisdom, and he opposes that.
He's a multidimensional character, and that's what I really like. We've lived through his journey, through his letters. I would really love it if you read a few sections from this. Can you do that?
Sure, yeah. I think two of the shorter ones. My favorite one is the Cape-Sunian dream sequence, but that's a little bit long to read. So I'll just read, two of the shorter letters. This is on page 26.
Okay.
And actually, this is, I believe, the one that you had set aside and enjoyed, so I think it's a fitting choice then. Now, every letter begins with an epithet. He addresses his friend Odysseus either from epithets drawn directly from Homer or from one he invents. So this is June 21st, 2001. Dear Odysseus, man of bold actions, I am now back in Rome, the center of the cosmos, having left Florence, riding the train through Tuscany. I much prefer Rome to Florence, as I find Florence to be more European than Italianate, whereas Rome possesses the high culture of the European North, while still retaining the earthy, raw, impassioned sensibility of the Italians. When one is in Florence, one may as well be in Madrid, London, or Paris, but when in Rome, one knows without question that one is in Italy. Here, the fallen ruins of antiquity and the passion of the people inscribe themselves into one soul like a meticulously crafted mosaic, immune to aging and decay, forever beautiful, forever eternal. The train ride from Florence to Rome was as beautiful as a fable peopled with poppies and princesses. I sat by the window and gazed at the picturesque Tuscan countryside, with its undulating hills speckled with sheaves of spangled light. After witnessing the pastoral beauty of Tuscany, how can one not long to bring forth similar beauty into the universe, to fill one's verse with the very songs of spring, the holy hymns of butterfly wings, the Aurorian dancing of leaping dolphins, and the wild wind, singing of all things Olympian. There is so much beauty contained in the world that at times I weep from the realization that one day it will all fade, as the glinting twilight succumbs to the dominance of night. Someday, we will merely be food for worms, not experiencing such beauty any longer. The golden dawn with her fingertips of twining rose, the wine-dark sea set aflame by empires of fiery constellations, the mellifluent sound of falling water in a lonely piazza, and the pure smile of a small child. Do you not find beauty to be utterly overwhelming, the provenance of so much pain, yet so much pleasure? Gabriele, the Tuscan philosopher.
Yeah, that actually is one I marked to be my favorite out of all of them. So I'm glad you read that.
Yeah, I mean, you see the descriptive quality of the prose,
Yes.
Which is, one could even say Baroque, and that stands apart from the minimalism favored by many in modernity. This is in the beginning of the novella, and it's a shorter letter as well, so it's one to read. And I think you also notice the descriptive quality here. Page 14, June 4th, 2001. Dear Odysseus, Parisian Flaneur. Oh, Rome. While in the taxi driving from Fiumicino towards the Eternal City, I felt as if I was closing in upon the rose-guarded garden of heaven itself, wondering if I would hear the very singing of the angels celebrating my arrival at the golden gates of St. Peter. Have I gone mad, Odysseus? Rome still remains the symbolic capital of Western civilization, despite what the damn moderns will tell you. Let them have New York and London, while we delight in the delicious light of Paris and Rome. Forza Roma, Viva la Paris. I'm settling into my publisher's apartment here in Rome on Viale Medaglia d'Oro. What a poetic-sounding street, and how fitting it is that I shall reside on the street of the Golden Meadow. He is traveling in the Mediterranean this summer, so I've rented his apartment here for the time being. This residence will serve as a base to explore as much of Italy as time and money will allow. I wish you had been able to see the Roman moon last night, for it shone like a bed of beryl bathed in Elysian light, like the bronze armor of strong-armed Hector, like wild wisps of silver floating in the sun-whipped ether, with the Roman moon swaying in the sky above, and the eternal city spread out before me like the lovely wings of a spring butterfly. What is a man to do but sigh for pleasure? I could not be happier, Odysseus. Gabriele, the proud Roman.
I love his fascination with the moon. I noticed that. It's a really big theme here.
Yeah, as far as the moon, yeah, I mean, you see the trio of similes, so the very descriptive quality and describing nature. He's often in these sort of lunar reveries or describing the sunlight or the way that the color of a particular flower or a woman. He's someone who really revels in pleasure and all sorts and all types of pleasure. My personal favorite is, and a lot of readers have commented as well on, is the dream sequence, the Cape Sunian. But the other thing that interesting is the cover of the novella.
Yes.
That's actually a collaboration with Gabriele Gonzalez Deloso. He's represented by the Eleanor Edinger Gallery in New York. Before the novella was published, she had read the portions of it and was inspired by it, and we collaborated on this painting. So I actually flew to New York to her studio, and we came up with the themes. You know, you see the bust of Homer and the Orphic tablets, and actually there's sayings derived from the novella, incorporated into the painting. Beauty and its pursuit is sustaining.
Yes.
Isn't it far better to live a poetic life than to spend one's life writing poetry? A man's destiny is not written in stone, but in water. And so, yeah, this painting was constructed for the cover, and it's actually, if anyone is listening to this and they happen to live in London, between, I believe it's June 1st through the 15th, it's going to be displayed at the Albert Morley Gallery, which I assume is I think it's on Albert Morley Street in London. So if anyone is there, they can actually go see the cover painting in England.
It's a very beautiful painting indeed. I especially like the little details as well.
Yeah, it was a collaboration. We jointly came up with the concept, which was fun for me. It wasn't simply I was posing, as a model for her, and it's simply as an instrument within her art. It was truly a collaboration, and we jointly thought of different concepts and what would look the best and what would symbolize, the soul of Gabriele. It was a fun project. In fact, I'll actually be working with Gabriele in the summer on another painting. We haven't yet decided just what it's going to be yet, but sometime this summer I'll be in New York and I'll be working with her again.
Wonderful. Also, I would like to read a letter that really stood out to me in the novella.
Okay.
June 11th, 2001. Dear Odysseus, Wandering Aline, I had an experience this morning that I think will perfectly illustrate the difference between our contemporaries and us. I was being driven through the outskirts of Rome, and my peripheral vision noticed what seemed to be thousands of majestic hawks flying in the sky. I could not pull my eyes from the beauty before me, being an avid lover of birds. The driver noticed my rapt gaze and laughed to himself. I asked him what was so humorous, and he remarked that all of his other patrons complained about the stench emanating from the landfill, but that I was the only one to stare like a little child at the birds flying above. And in truth, Odysseus, I hadn't noticed the smell since I was so engrossed in the viewing the varied flights of these regal birds as these wondrous wings drifted in between teeming beams of light. Their movements were so graceful and peaceful that the entire firmament seemed to be in total unison, as if a moving symphony, a dazzling intermezzo, a spellbinding adagio were in progress, conducted by the very hand of God. I had an urge to write a poem about their beauty, and even dreamt of how lovely it would be to transmogrify into a flying hawk, completely free, beholden to no man, god, or government, drifting aimlessly like a wandering gypsy through the sun-blessed sky. Now, were one of the small-souled moderns in this cab, they would have written a prosaic fragment about the vile stench, or gone even further, commanding the driver to stop the car, so that they could roll about in the excrement and refuse, writing from the very belly of the landfill. Let these men be prophets of the gutter, while we continue to sing of the heavenly hawk. I'm not a man wearing rose-tinted glasses, Odysseus, as I am well aware of the degradation and ugliness in the world. Yet I am also sensitive to the vast empires of beauty in the cosmos, so much so that I long for 1,000 lives to experience every single sensation of beauty. Gabriele, student of the beautiful. And the reason I read this one is because I do notice some people do not really appreciate beauty for what it is and instead try to nitpick negativity. And it's just the hawks, I feel like I can almost see what he sees. And even when I was in Greece, I would appreciate something as simple as the trees, and, some people there would find it pretty humorous. They would wonder, why I'm so at awe with all of these things, and they even tell me it's not such a great place. There's economic crisis, there's this, there's that. So I appreciate his love of beauty and capturing the beauty in such elegant words.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely an aesthete, descended from such figures like Walter Pater and Swinburne and Wilde and Symonds and, various other aesthetes. And so the idea of this passage is, like you mentioned, is, to contrast himself with the modern intellectual, with the modern writer, and to say essentially that, there are these hawks circling above a landfill, and someone like, he mentions Bukowski, someone with the soul of Bukowski, would essentially go into the landfill and write, in sort of simple, spare language about the degradation, the stench of the landfill. But Gabriele, he's looking in the clouds. He's a man of the clouds. He's looking at the hawks. And actually, the genesis of this passage is my mother lives a little bit north of me here in Florida, and so when I drive on the Florida Turnpike, there actually is a landfill, and so one time I was driving and I saw all these hawks, and I kept looking at the hawks and studying their flight, and I almost crashed in my car actually because I kept looking at the hawks as I'm driving, and then I realized, oh my God, there's a landfill, and I just sort of laughed at myself for again, and then I just obviously I took that little vignette there and applied it to set in Italy for the novella. But yeah, I mean that's Gabriele. He's the man of the clouds. He's not a man of the landfill, and so yeah, that's I'm glad you enjoyed that passage, and that's where it's derived from.
And I really like that some of your personal experiences is entwined in these letters, even though it's not, the exact same thing still. And on page 28, I wanted to read part of a letter, the last paragraph. It really also stuck out to me. But now speaking on love, I must state to you that I have never been half in love with an easeful death, much preferring the prospect of a heroic death. What say you, Mr. Payne? Will you come to Cyprus to fight the Turks with me? Should I adopt this noble cause and actually do something with my damned life? Like Odysseus, Homer Odysseus, not you. I am no one and nothing, but I long to do something epic, something worthy of my ancestors. I promise to give you command of many men, if you come along for the adventure. If nothing else, we will die cloaked in Kleos Apleton, disproving Auden's famous saying, poetry makes nothing happen. For Gabriele, son of Sappho and Heracles. I just really like how nobility, something very heroic in this. I mean, I am no one and nothing, but he longs to do something extraordinarily epic.
Yeah, Gabriele is a man who longs for heroism in himself and in the modern world, and one of his frustrations is really the inability to express that. And so with his war, his personal war that he's planned against the Turks in Cyprus, that they invaded in 1974 and the island was divided, essentially him looking out into the modern world and saying, where is something where I can express my Homeric soul? Where is there a place where I can make a difference, where I can do something? And so with Cyprus, again, it's part of the romantic persona. One here should think of Byron, in the 19th century. One should also think of Gabriele D'Annunzio, and it's not an accident, his name is Gabriele. But D'Annunzio, he's a very controversial figure. He became fascist and whatnot with Mussolini, but he actually took Fiume, which is a town and was contested. And so, sort of the romantic ideal of the self, the egotism, if you will. And so that's an expression. He has this imagined war plan with maps and wooden horses and his own army. He's not quite Don Quixote and he's not quite Achilles. He's somewhere between the two. So, meaning he's not quite the fool and he's not quite the hero. He's somewhere in that middle ground. But yeah, so that's the idea with the whole mention of Cyprus, and he's longing to be sort of supreme commander of the Greek army and invade and liberate Cyprus for the Greeks.
Yes, he's a very fascinating man, as well as this is a fascinating novella. I'd like to thank you for talking about this with me. It's been a true pleasure reading the novella itself and speaking with you about this.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you taking the time to order and read and do this interview with me. I definitely appreciate that. So thank you very much.